Her back hit the kitchen counter before she even understood she was falling. Tiffany Parker grabbed at the edge of the sink, and Orlando's hand closed around her wrist so tight she heard something in her own arm complain. She was 3 months pregnant. She remembered telling him that, out loud, like it would stop him. It didn't. His voice was flat when he told her she brought this on herself, that she should have just come straight home like he asked. Then she hit the stairs. Then the sound her own body made against the 4th step. Then nothing but the ceiling of an ambulance, spinning slow, and a stranger's voice telling her to stay awake. Welcome back, my beautiful story lovers, to Afro Soul Love TV. Let me ask you something. Have you ever met someone who completely changed the direction of your life, whether for better or worse? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if you're enjoying this one, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let's go back to where all of this started. It started at a block party on a hot Saturday in Bed-Stuy. The kind where somebody's uncle brings a grill he clearly does not know how to control, and half the block shows up anyway. Tiffany was there with Camille, laughing at a folding table that kept collapsing every time someone leaned on it. A man reached out and caught the table before it hit the ground, and when he looked up, he was grinning like he'd just saved somebody's life instead of a plate of ribs. "You're welcome," he said, before she even asked. "For what? You almost let my food hit the concrete." Almost. Key word is almost. He held out his hand. Orlando. "Tiffany." She looked him over, unbothered, the way she looked at everybody. "You always this confident about tables you didn't build?" He laughed, and it was a real laugh, not a performance. That was what got her. Orlando Lopes worked the docks in Red Hook, came up from Cape Verde with his mother when he was 9, and still played guitar badly on purpose at his cousin's restaurant because it made people laugh harder than if he played it well. He remembered small things. He asked good questions. When Tiffany mentioned she was thinking about going back to school for healthcare management, he didn't blink, didn't make a joke out of it. He said, "You'd be good at that. You already run half that hospital and they don't even pay you for it." Nobody had said that to her before, not like he meant it. They moved fast, the way people do when it feels right. 6 months in, he had a key. A year in, they were married at a courthouse with Camille as the witness and Tiffany's mother, Loretta, crying more than the bride. Loretta pulled Tiffany aside that same day, in the hallway outside the clerk's office, and asked her one question. "You sure about this, baby?" "Ma, I'm sure. I'm not asking if you love him. I'm asking if you're sure." Tiffany laughed it off then. She didn't understand the difference yet. The first year was good, genuinely good. Orlando showed up. He learned her coffee order without asking twice. But somewhere around month 10, the questions started changing shape. Not "how was your day," but "who was that man walking you to your car?" Not "are you tired," but "why do you need night classes when I'm already working overtime for us?" Small things. Things she explained away in her own head before he even had to. "He's stressed about work. He's scared of losing me. He loves me too much, that's all." The first time he grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise, it was over a missed phone call. She'd been in a meeting. He'd called 11 times. When she got home, he wasn't yelling. He was quiet, which was worse. He held her wrist and said, "Lo, you scared me. Don't ever do that to me again." She told Camille it was nothing. She told herself it was nothing. She believed, the way a lot of women believe, that love this strong just came with weather like this sometimes. Then she got pregnant. She found out on a Tuesday, alone in her bathroom, and cried from happiness before she even told him. When she did tell him, he picked her up and spun her around the living room, laughing, saying he was going to be somebody's father, saying his own father never got the chance to see him grow, so this baby was going to have everything he didn't. For a few weeks, Orlando was the man from the block party again. Then the fear came in behind the joy, the way it does with men who've never learned another way to hold both at once. He started talking about money different, about her going back to school different. "You need to pause them classes," he told her one night, not asking. "We got a baby coming. I need you home more." "Pause, not quit," she said. "I already paid for the semester, Orlando." I said pause. She paused it. She told herself it was temporary, that once the baby came, once things settled, she'd pick it back up. She kept believing that story right up until the night everything changed for good. The night she was already bleeding on a kitchen floor, before she understood how she got there. That night started small, the way they always did. She'd picked up a double shift at the hospital without telling him first, because a coworker's kid was sick and somebody had to cover. She got home late. He was standing in the kitchen with the light off, which should have told her everything. "You couldn't call," he said. "I called on my break, Orlando. You didn't pick up. You couldn't call before you said yes to a double." His voice climbed. Hers did too, because by then, she was tired of shrinking every time he raised his. "I'm allowed to work my job," she said. "I'm allowed to make a decision without asking your permission first. You're carrying my child. I'm carrying our child, and I'm still a person, Orlando." That was the sentence that did it. He crossed the kitchen fast, faster than she expected, and grabbed her by both arms. She pulled back toward the counter to get space, and that was when his hand caught her wrist and twisted, and that was when her back hit the counter, and the last clear thought she had before the pain swallowed everything was, "This isn't an accident, and I need to remember that later." She didn't get the chance to remember it right away. What she got instead was a hospital bed, a blood pressure cuff tightening on her arm, and a doctor's voice, careful and low, telling her words no mother ever wants to hear. "Mrs. Lopes, I need you to look at me." The voice belonged to a man she didn't recognize. Dark scrubs, steady hands, a name badge she couldn't focus on yet. "You lost a lot of blood. I'm so sorry. We couldn't save the pregnancy." The sentence didn't land right away. Then it landed all at once, and Tiffany turned her face to the wall and made a sound she didn't recognize as her own voice. The doctor didn't leave. That was the first thing that felt strange. Later, when she thought back on it, most people give you the news and step out to let you fall apart in private. He stayed, quiet, adjusting the IV line, checking the monitor, giving her a minute before he spoke again. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked. "I fell," she said, the words already worn smooth from repeating them in the ambulance. "I fell down the stairs." He looked at her wrist before he looked at her face. There was a spiral bruise circling it, the kind that comes from twisting, not catching a railing. There was a second bruise blooming on her upper arm, 4 narrow marks and 1 wider one, shaped exactly like a hand. He'd been a trauma surgeon long enough to know what a fall looked like on a body, and this was not that. He didn't say any of that out loud. Not yet. He just nodded slowly, the way you nod at someone when you're deciding not to push. "Okay," he said. "We're going to take care of you." His name was Dr. Kim Min-jun, though the badge said only Kim, MD. And there was no reason for Tiffany, drowning in her own grief, to notice that the man treating her was also the CEO of one of the largest hospital and medical technology companies on the East Coast. He scrubbed in one night a week under that quiet badge, no title, no assistant trailing him, because it was the only place left where nobody needed anything from him except his hands doing the job right. He stepped out of the room an hour later to find Orlando in the waiting area, performing grief loudly enough for the whole floor to hear, crying into a hospital chaplain's shoulder, telling a nurse near the desk that his wife tripped over the dog on her way down. Tiffany and Orlando did not own a dog. Min-jun had read her intake form 20 minutes earlier. There was no dog listed, no pet at all, and Orlando had told him personally, in the hallway, that she'd fallen down the stairs alone. 2 different stories, 20 minutes apart, to 2 different people. Min-jun had seen that pattern before, in other families, in other exam rooms, and it never once turned out to mean nothing. He didn't confront him. Not that night. He watched Orlando accept a cup of coffee from a nurse who told him what a good husband he was for staying so calm, and Min-jun felt something harden quietly in his chest, something he would spend the next year trying to justify to himself as simple professional concern, and would eventually have to admit was never only that. There was another reason her name had stopped him cold when he first read her chart, something that had nothing to do with the bruises. 17 years earlier, Kim Min-jun had spent one lonely semester as a transfer student at a Brooklyn magnet high school, before his family moved him again, before a business inheritance turned his last name into something people said with a title attached. He was 15, barely spoke English with any confidence, and most of his classmates found him easy to laugh at. Only one girl, a senior he barely knew, ever stopped at his locker to ask if he was doing all right. She wrote him a short note once, on a torn page from a spiral notebook, when he was having a bad week. Nothing dramatic, just a few kind sentences, and her name signed at the bottom. He kept that page in a drawer for 17 years and never told anyone why. Her name was Tiffany Parker. She had no memory of him at all. Why would she? He was one forgettable, awkward boy in a hallway of hundreds, and she was a senior who was kind to everyone, not just him. But he remembered her. Completely. The second her name came across his tablet that night, and something in him refused to let that coincidence sit still. He wanted to walk into the waiting room and put Orlando against the wall and ask him, man to man, what really happened on those stairs. His sister Sujin, who ran legal for Hanul Health Group and had spent her whole career cleaning up messes her brother's conscience got him into, would have talked him out of it even if she hadn't been 3 states away that night. When he called her the next morning, half-formed plan already in his mouth, she stopped him cold. You walk up to that man and accuse him, she said, and you hand him a lawsuit, a headline, and a reason to disappear before anyone can build a real case. And she goes home with him anyway, Min Jun, because that is what happens. You'll have done nothing but teach him to hide it better. So I do nothing. You do it right. Quietly, slowly. You build something that can't be talked away in an emergency room at midnight. He hated how correct she was. He hated it more 3 days later, when hospital records showed Tiffany had been discharged and had gone home. To Orlando, to the same address, to the same story she was going to keep telling herself for a while longer. Because grief has a way of making people cling harder to the thing that hurt them, not run from it. Tiffany didn't leave because, in her mind, leaving wasn't the story she was in yet. Orlando cried at her bedside before they discharged her, real tears, his hands shaking around hers. I was trying to catch you, he said. Baby, I would never. You know I would never. And grief, hers and his both, folded around the two of them like something that could still be repaired if they just held on tighter. She let him drive her home. She let herself believe, one more time, that this was an accident born out of two people scared and exhausted, not a pattern with a shape. She had no idea that 4 floors above the parking garage she left from, a man who remembered her handwriting from 17 years ago had already made a decision that would take him the better part of a year to see through. Not to save her, exactly, because he understood by then that people cannot be saved from the outside, only given enough room, quietly, patiently, to save themselves. 2 weeks after the miscarriage, Min Jun sat across from Sujin in a conference room with the blinds down and asked her to pull something he had no official right to request without more cause. An internal chart review, discreet, compliant, buried inside a routine quality audit so it wouldn't raise flags. What came back confirmed what he already suspected. 3 prior emergency visits over 2 years. A kitchen burn explained as an accident with a pan. A car door that closed on her hand. A fall at a gym that had no record of Tiffany ever holding a membership there. Each visit, a different explanation, each one just plausible enough on its own to pass without question. This isn't proof of anything in a courtroom, Sujin warned him, sliding the folder back across the table. This is a pattern only you and I can see. Then, I need more than a pattern. He hired Frank Delgado the following week, a private investigator who'd spent 15 years doing exactly this kind of work before going independent. Quiet documentation, nothing illegal, nothing that would ever touch Tiffany directly. Delgado's rule, stated on their first call, became Min Jun's rule too. We don't approach her. We don't warn her. We build a file strong enough that when she's ready, it's already waiting. Min Jun also brought in Mira Nair, a forensic accountant who specialized in cases where money had quietly become another weapon in the house. It took Nair less than a month to find what she was looking for. Orlando had opened a second account in a bank 2 neighborhoods away. One Tiffany had no login for, no statements mailed to their shared address for. Part of her paycheck, automated, had been rerouting there for 11 months. Worse, 2 credit lines existed under Tiffany's name that she'd never applied for. Both opened the same month Orlando lost overtime hours at the shipping terminal. Whatever this was, it wasn't only about control inside their apartment, it was about control of her entire financial life. Built so carefully she had no idea it existed. She doesn't know any of this, Nair said on their weekly call, and there was something almost personal in her voice by then, the way there always is with people who spend their careers looking at damage other people caused on paper. When she finds out, and she will, this is going to break something in her all over again. Min-jun understood that. He understood it every single week that passed without doing anything with what he knew, because doing something too soon meant doing it wrong. He kept working his Thursday night shift at Brookline Medical Center through all of it, because stopping would have meant admitting to himself that this had stopped being about staying grounded and started being about staying close to a case file with her name on it. He told himself the two things were separate. Some weeks he almost believed it. The first time he saw her outside a hospital room, it wasn't planned, though later she would have every reason to wonder. It was near midnight in a 24-hour supermarket in Crown Heights, both of them reaching for the same rotisserie chicken under the heat lamp, the last one on the tray. "You can have it," he said, stepping back. "I got here second." "You sure? You look like a man who skipped dinner for this exact chicken." "I did, actually." She laughed, tired but real, and something in her face made an offer she wouldn't have made a year earlier. "There's another one in the back. I saw the guy stalking it 10 minutes ago. Come on." She led a stranger to the back of a grocery store at midnight to solve his dinner problem, because that was who she was underneath everything that had happened to her. Still generous, still funny, even wrung out. He didn't tell her his name meant anything. He said Min, and left it there, and she said Tiffany, and had no idea she was repeating herself from 17 years earlier. They didn't exchange numbers. It didn't feel like that kind of moment. But weeks later, her car died at a gas station in Red Hook, on her way to a night class she was taking again in secret, against Orlando's wishes. Paying for it with cash from tips Camille slipped her under the table. A man in a plain jacket, parked 2 pumps over, offered jumper cables before she even asked. "You again?" she said, half laughing, recognizing him immediately. "Small borough." "It is not a small borough, Min. This is Brooklyn. Feels small tonight." He crouched by her battery, hands steady, asking easy questions while he worked. How the class was going, what she was studying, whether she liked it. She talked more than she meant to. She told him about wanting to run a department someday, about being tired of being the smartest person in a room who still had to ask permission to speak in it. He listened in a way that made her feel, for 20 minutes at a gas station, like a whole person instead of somebody's wife managing somebody's moods. She didn't tell Orlando about either meeting. Not because it was anything, it wasn't, not yet, but because she'd learned, without meaning to learn it, to keep small good things to herself, the way you hide a candle from wind. A month later, at a friend's birthday dinner in Bed-Stuy that Camille physically dragged her to, she stepped into a hallway to take a work call and nearly walked into him again, this time in a suit that fit like it cost more than her monthly rent. Coming out of a private room where a hospital fundraiser dinner was wrapping up. "Min?" He looked, for 1 second, like a man caught somewhere he wasn't supposed to be seen. "Tiffany. Small borough." "Okay, now that is 3 times. Coincidence has range. She should have asked more questions. Some part of her, the sharp part that noticed everything at work and missed nothing on a chart, did wonder, briefly, how a man in a jacket with no watch at a supermarket ended up in a room like this. But she was still wearing her ring. She was still telling Camille, and herself, that she and Orlando were working things out. So she let the question go, laughed instead, and told him if this kept happening she was going to start believing in fate, which she absolutely did not believe in. He didn't correct her. He should have. He didn't. The care package arrived on a Tuesday, left with the building's front desk, no return address. A small basket from the hospital's patient support fund, a note card that read only, "Wishing you strength. You are not alone." It was real support, quietly funded by Min Jun's foundation, and routed through a program that helped dozens of patients a month, completely untraceable, back to him personally. Tiffany almost cried reading it. For 1 full minute, she felt seen by someone, anyone. Orlando found the card an hour later. "Who sent this?" "I don't know, Orlando. It's from the hospital. It's a program." Nobody sends a stranger a gift basket. His voice was already climbing the way it did before things got bad. "Who is he?" "There is no he. Read the card." He didn't read the card. He threw it, watched it skid under the couch, and grabbed her phone off the counter before she could stop him, scrolling with his thumb hard enough to nearly crack the screen. "You been talking to somebody?" "I know you have." "I have not been talking to anybody. Give me my phone back." He didn't hit her that night. What he did instead was almost worse in its own quiet way. He took her car keys off the hook by the door, unplugged the router, and told her, flat and final, that her phone line was getting canceled in the morning until she remembered who she belonged to. He said it like it was a kindness, like he was protecting something. She stood in the middle of her own living room, suddenly with no phone, no car, and no way to reach her own mother, and understood for the first time in a long while just how small her world had become without her noticing it shrink. She waited 3 days before she told Camille, in a bathroom at work, voice barely above a whisper. Camille didn't lecture her. She just listened, jaw tight, and said one thing that stuck. "You know this isn't love, right? You know that." "I know," Tiffany said, and for the first time, she almost believed herself. Camille brought her, the following Sunday, to a small support group that met in the basement of a church 2 blocks from Tiffany's childhood home. Run by a soft-spoken pastor named Ellison, who never once told any of the women in that circle what to do, only asked questions that made them answer themselves. Tiffany sat in a folding chair against the wall the first time, arms crossed, certain she didn't belong there. A woman 2 seats down described losing access to her own bank account, her own phone plan, her own car, one small privilege at a time, until she looked up one day and didn't recognize the size of the cage she was standing in. Tiffany didn't say a word that first meeting. She cried the whole drive home instead, silent, so Camille wouldn't have to say anything either. Meanwhile, Minjun was starting to lose an argument with himself that he didn't want to admit he was having. Delgado's reports kept arriving. Dates, times, patterns, all useful, all necessary. And one night, reading through them alone in his office with the city lights doing nothing to make the room feel less empty, he found himself wondering whether what he was doing had quietly become its own kind of control. Watching someone's whole life from a distance, deciding what she needed before she asked for it. Soo-jin walked in on him mid-thought, uninvited as always, and read his face before he said a word. "You're doing it too," she said. Managing her life without asking her. Just from further away, with better manners. That's not fair. It's not supposed to be fair. It's supposed to be true. He sat with that for a long time after she left. It changed how he moved forward. He stopped funding things anonymously toward her specifically and started building real, transparent programs anyone in her position could apply for on their own. A legitimate healthcare fellowship through the hospital's foundation, open applications, a real review board, no secret thumb on the scale beyond the fact that he'd created the fund in the first place. Tiffany applied for the Brookline Community Advancement Grant that spring, the same way hundreds of other people did, filling out the form on her lunch break, listing her night classes, her work history, her reason for wanting it in 3 honest sentences she rewrote 4 times. She got in. She read the acceptance letter twice before she let herself believe it, sitting on the edge of her bed with her hand over her mouth. It wasn't charity, it was money she'd have to account for. A program with real deadlines, real coursework, a real path toward the healthcare management title she'd wanted since she was 22 years old answering phones at a clinic in East New York. For one evening, before Orlando got home, she let herself feel like her own person again. He read the letter on the kitchen table where she'd left it, and something in him that had been quiet for weeks came back all at once. He didn't yell first. He picked the letter up, tore it once, twice, and let the pieces fall onto the floor like it settled something. "You're not doing this. Orlando, this is my future. I said you're not doing this." He grabbed her laptop off the counter next, the one she'd saved 4 months for, and threw it hard enough against the wall that the screen split down the middle in a spiderweb crack. The sound of it hit her harder than she expected. Not because of the money, because in that single motion she understood, clearer than any bruise had ever made her understand, that this wasn't really about her safety to him at all. It had never been about protecting her. It was about making sure she never had anything of her own that he couldn't take back. She didn't cry in front of him that night. She waited until he was asleep, sat on the bathroom floor with the door locked, and allowed herself, for the very first time since she'd married him, to think the sentence all the way through, instead of stopping halfway. "I have to leave this man. Not someday, soon." Her father called 2 weeks later, his voice thinner than she remembered, asking her to come to Charlotte. He was dying, faster than the doctors first said, and he wanted to see her before it was too late for either of them to say anything that mattered. Tiffany went straight to the account she'd been quietly rebuilding since the laptop incident, only to find the shared credit card, the one she assumed still worked in an emergency, had been cancelled weeks earlier without her knowledge. She stood at the gate at LaGuardia with a suitcase and a declined card, calling Camille in a panic, when a familiar voice behind her in the boarding line said her name. Tiffany? She turned, and there he was again. Min, jacket slung over one arm, boarding pass in his hand for the same flight. No plan behind it this time, just genuine coincidence. A business trip that happened to be departing from the same gate at the same hour. He saw her face before she said a word and didn't ask questions she wasn't ready for yet. He simply said, "Whatever's wrong, we'll figure it out before boarding closes." And somehow, between a call to a hospital emergency travel fund he oversaw and never once mentioned by name, a new ticket appeared in her hand within 20 minutes. They ended up seated near each other by another quiet coincidence neither of them arranged. Somewhere over Virginia, in the low hum of the cabin, she told him about her father, about the man who left when she was young, about the mother who raised her alone and never once badmouthed him for it. He told her, carefully, about growing up between two countries, about a family name that came with more weight than comfort. Neither of them mentioned Orlando by name. They didn't have to. It sat quietly between them the whole flight, unspoken and understood. Her father died 4 days later, in a hospital bed that smelled like antiseptic and old cologne, with Tiffany holding one hand and a nurse holding the other. Before he went, in a voice barely above breath, he told her something she never expected to hear. He told her he had been the reason her mother left when Tiffany was small. Not the version she'd always half believed, a man who simply wandered off, but a man her mother ran from, the same way Tiffany now understood. Sitting in that room, she herself needed to run. "I'm sorry," he told her. "I'm sorry you found somebody who reminds you of me." Nobody had said it out loud to her like that before, and it landed harder than any bruise ever had. Because it wasn't an accusation. It was a warning. 17 years too late for her mother, arriving exactly in time for her. She flew home changed. Not loud about it, Tiffany was never loud about her decisions. She was strategic, the same way she'd always been at work, but changed all the way through. She started saving cash in an envelope taped behind a dresser drawer Orlando never checked. She started photographing every mark he left, dating each picture in a notes app disguised under a folder labeled recipes. She started talking, carefully, to a special victims detective named Alvarez, a contact of Camille's from the ER, feeding her small pieces of information over coffee on her lunch breaks, never enough at once to feel like a confession, just enough to build something slow and solid. Orlando felt her pulling away before she said a single word about leaving, the way people like him always do, and he reached for a different kind of leverage than his fists this time. Her cousin Marisol, who'd been staying with them for 8 months while she sorted out her immigration paperwork, was undocumented and terrified of exactly one thing more than anything else in the world. Orlando sat across from Tiffany one night, calm in a way that scared her more than shouting ever had, and told her plainly that if she tried to leave, he'd make one phone call about Marisol that neither of them could take back. "You wouldn't," Tiffany said, though even as she said it, she knew he would. "Try me." It was the cruelest thing he'd ever done to her, worse than any bruise, because it moved the danger off her own body and onto someone she loved who had no way to protect herself. Tiffany didn't sleep that night. She sat in the dark kitchen where it had all started and understood, finally and completely, that leaving wasn't going to be one clean decision. It was going to be a fight on multiple fronts, and she was going to need more than an envelope of cash and a folder of photographs to win it. She had no idea, that same week, how many of those fronts were already quietly closing in on Orlando, from directions that had nothing to do with her at all. Detective Alvarez had an open file on him already, unrelated to anything Tiffany had shared. A coworker at the shipping terminal had filed an assault complaint against Orlando 8 months earlier, one that had been buried for a while by a union representative who happened to be Orlando's own uncle, but was buried no longer, because the coworker had recently found a lawyer of his own. Billionaire's financial trail had finally reached a threshold that made it a matter for the district attorney's office, not just a private investigator's file. And Frank Delgado had documented enough now, dates, patterns, corroborating hospital records, that what had started as a quiet, patient collection of facts had become something close to a case file, with real weight behind it. None of these threads had been pulled together yet into one room. But they were all moving toward the same point in time, faster than either Tiffany or Orlando understood, and the collision, when it came, was going to arrive on a night neither of them was prepared for. The divorce attorney's office was small, tucked above a laundromat 2 train stops from Tiffany's apartment, recommended by a woman from Pastor Ellison's group who'd used her services the year before. Tiffany sat across from her with the folder of photographs, the dated notes, the bank statements Billionaire's investigation would later prove were only the surface of what Orlando had done, and for the first time in over a year, said the sentence fully, without flinching. I want a divorce, and I want to do it safely. The attorney, calm and direct, laid out exactly how dangerous the next weeks could be, that the most lethal window for a woman in Tiffany's position often wasn't the years of abuse itself, but the moment right after she decided to leave. We plan this carefully, she said. We don't rush it. We build the exit before we ever tell him it's happening. Tiffany didn't know that this same attorney had been quietly retained months earlier by a foundation connected to Hanul Health Group, specifically to help women in exactly her situation, free of charge, no strings, no requirement to ever know who was behind it. She simply thought she'd gotten lucky finding good, affordable representation through her church group. She had no idea how many threads had already been pulled into place around her, one after another, by a man she still only knew as Min. She started packing slowly, one bag at a time, hidden at the bottom of Camille's closet. She set up a code word with Camille and with Pastor Ellison both, the word recipe, sent by text, meaning, come now, don't call first, don't explain. She thought she had more time than she did. Orlando found the folder on a Thursday night, tucked behind the dresser drawer where she kept her cash, because he'd started checking that drawer weeks earlier without her knowing. Suspicious in the particular way abusive men get suspicious right before they lose control of someone completely. He was waiting for her when she got home from her shift, folder open on the kitchen table, photographs spread out like evidence at a trial that hadn't started yet. You've been building a case against me, he said, and his voice had none of its usual heat. It was ice instead, which was somehow worse. This whole time, Orlando, sit down. She didn't sit down. She turned toward the door, and that was when he moved faster than she'd ever seen him move, locking the deadbolt, pulling her phone out of her bag before she could reach it, dropping it into his own pocket like a trophy. You're not going anywhere, he said. Not until we talk about this like husband and wife. For the first time since the miscarriage, Tiffany understood with total clarity that she was in real, immediate danger. Not the slow, deniable kind she'd been living inside for over a year, but the kind that ends badly if nobody comes. She thought fast, the way she'd learned to think fast at work under pressure. The apartment's old landline, disconnected for calls out but somehow still able to send a text through the cable box's linked app on a tablet charging in the hallway, was still logged into her account. While Orlando paced the living room, working himself up into something she recognized as the edge of the worst version of him she'd ever seen, she slipped into the hallway, opened that tablet, and typed one word to Camille. Recipe. Then she typed a second message, this one to Detective Alvarez, whose number she'd memorized weeks earlier for exactly this reason. 3 words that meant more than any of them. He's not letting me leave. Minjun, that same night, was 3 boroughs away in an emergency meeting with Hanul Health's board, because the financial fraud evidence Billionaire had compiled had finally reached the district attorney's office that week. And with it came uncomfortable questions about the foundation that funded the investigation, about a CEO who moonlighted anonymously at a hospital, about exactly how close he'd gotten to a woman connected to an active case. He was fighting a different kind of fight that night, one that had nothing to do with fists and everything to do with keeping the machinery he'd built quietly running long enough to finish what it started. What arrived at Tiffany's apartment instead was Camille, who broke every speed limit getting there, and 2 nifty officers Detective Alvarez had already staged 3 blocks away, waiting on the open assault complaint from Orlando's coworker that had nothing to do with Tiffany at all, but had put Orlando on Alvarez's radar as someone worth watching closely that week. When Camille's fists hit the apartment door hard enough to bring a neighbor into the hallway, and the neighbor called it in as a disturbance, the officers were close enough to arrive in under 4 minutes. Orlando opened the door believing it was Camille alone. It was not. Orlando was arrested that night on the spot, on an immediate charge of unlawful imprisonment, with the responding officers noting Tiffany's phone still in his jacket pocket and the deadbolt still engaged when they arrived. It wasn't the full weight of everything Minjun's team had built. That would come later, slower, messier, the way real justice usually does. But it was enough to get him out of that apartment in handcuffs, while Tiffany stood wrapped in a blanket in her own hallway, shaking, alive. Camille didn't let go of her hand the entire time officers took statements. Detective Alvarez arrived 20 minutes later, and something shifted in her face when she saw Tiffany standing there in one piece. Relief, mostly. The kind that detectives who've worked cases like this too many times allow themselves only briefly before getting back to business. "We've had eyes on him for the assault at his job," Alvarez told her gently. "That's actually what had us close enough tonight, but what you just gave us, what's in that folder, that's going to matter too. A lot." Over the following weeks, the case against Orlando split into pieces the way these things almost always do in real life. Not one clean trial with one clean verdict, but several separate threads moving at their own speed. The unlawful imprisonment charge held. The financial fraud case, built on Mira Nair's months of tracing false credit lines and diverted paychecks, moved forward as its own separate matter with the district attorney's office, and turned out to be the charge with the most paper behind it, the hardest for any lawyer to argue away. The assault complaint from his coworker resulted in a plea deal that kept him out of a longer sentence but left a permanent mark on his record. A judge granted Tiffany a full order of protection within days, fast-tracked given the documented pattern across years, not just one bad night. It wasn't the tidy ending some people might have wanted for her. Orlando's mother, Donna Lopez, showed up at the courthouse for one of the early hearings and for the first time in over a year, didn't defend her son the moment she saw Tiffany in the hallway. She simply looked at her, tired in a way Tiffany had never seen on her before, and said quietly, "I should have asked more questions a long time ago." It wasn't an apology exactly. It was close enough that Tiffany let herself accept it as one. In the middle of all of it, working with the DA's office to formally hand over the financial fraud evidence, Tiffany's new attorney mentioned, almost in passing, the name of the foundation that had funded the original forensic accounting work months before Tiffany ever hired her. A foundation connected to Hanul Health Group. Tiffany sat with that detail for a full day before it clicked into place. The fellowship, the emergency plane ticket, the care package. A supermarket that wasn't as small a borough as she joked it was. She pulled the file herself, cross-referencing names on the foundation's board, and found, buried 3 pages in, the name Kim Min-jun, listed as founding trustee. Not Min. Kim Min-jun, CEO of a company she'd read about in passing a dozen times without ever connecting it to a man who once helped her jump a dead car battery in Red Hook. She didn't feel grateful first. She felt something closer to exposed, like she'd been a case study instead of a person. Like every coincidence over the past year had actually been a hand quietly guiding pieces on a board she never knew she was playing on. She showed up at Brookline Medical Center on a Thursday evening, the one night a week she now understood he still worked there, and found him coming off a shift, still in scrubs, surprised in a way that told her immediately he hadn't planned this meeting either. "You knew," she said, before he could say anything at all. "This whole time, the gas station, the airport, all of it. Some of it," he admitted. "Not all of it was arranged. Some of it really was just this city being smaller than either of us expected. That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It's not." She stood there in the hallway of a hospital that had seen the worst night of her life and, apparently, the quiet beginning of something else entirely, and asked him the only question that mattered. Why me? Out of everyone you could have helped, why did it become me? He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that she almost turned to leave, before he finally answered her, an answer that would change the way she understood the entire last year of her life, and one she never once saw coming. "Because you already helped me once," he said, 17 years before you ever walked into my emergency room. He told her about the transfer semester, about the hallway locker, about a boy nobody bothered to learn the name of because his English was slow and his confidence was slower. He told her about the one girl who stopped, who asked if he was okay, who wrote him a few kind sentences on a torn notebook page during the worst week of his life at that school. He reached into his jacket and showed her a photograph of that page, folded soft at the creases from being carried and refolded for almost 2 decades. Her handwriting. Her name signed at the bottom, in the loose, looping style she'd long since outgrown. "I don't remember you," she said quietly. "And it wasn't cruel, just true. I know, you weren't supposed to. You were kind to a lot of people that year. I was just the one who never forgot it." She stood with that for a long moment, turning the folded page over in her hands. It didn't erase what he'd done, the watching, the arranging, the quiet management of pieces of her life, without ever once asking her permission. She told him that plainly, without softening it. "You don't get to decide what I need. Not even with good intentions. Especially not with good intentions." "I know that now," he said. "I didn't always," he told her, standing right there in that hallway, that he was stepping back completely, resigning from his Thursday night shift, instructing his foundation to formally close any file connected to her name, removing himself entirely from anything that touched her life going forward. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Not gratitude, not time, not feelings you didn't choose on your own." He meant it. He disappeared from her orbit as thoroughly as he'd once quietly filled it, and for 6 weeks, Tiffany heard nothing from him at all. Those 6 weeks did more for her than the entire year before them. She finished her semester at the top of her class. She was offered a real promotion at Brookline Medical Center, into a coordinator role she'd earned entirely on her own transcript and her own record. Nothing arranged, nothing quiet pulling strings behind it. She rebuilt her friendship with Camille into something even steadier than before. She sat with her mother, Loretta, on a Sunday afternoon and finally told her everything, all of it, and let herself be held the way she hadn't let herself be held in over a year. Then, in December, 14 months almost to the week since the night she lost her baby, Tiffany's new coordinator role placed her on a community health initiative that happened to fall under Hanul Health Group's outreach division. She learned, reviewing the project roster, that the CEO himself almost never attended these meetings anymore, hadn't in over a year, kept his distance from that division entirely now as a matter of principle. She sat with that information for exactly 1 afternoon before she picked up the office phone and did something she never expected to be the one doing. She asked for him personally, by name, for the next meeting. He walked into that conference room 3 weeks later, the first time he'd set foot in that division in 14 months, and found her sitting at the head of the table with a folder of her own this time, full of ideas, full of her own plan for the project, nothing about her situation, nothing about the past year, just her work, standing entirely on its own. She looked up when he walked in and didn't smile right away, just held his gaze steady across the room. "You came," she said. "You asked." "That's the difference," she said, "isn't it?" They talked after the meeting, in a hallway that felt different this time, longer, unhurried, honest in a way their conversations had never quite been allowed to be before. She told him she wasn't looking for anyone to arrange her life from a distance ever again. Not even someone with good intentions. Not even someone who'd once kept a torn notebook page for 17 years. She told him what she was looking for instead was an equal, someone who'd sit across a table and let her make her own decisions. Badly sometimes, brilliantly other times, without ever once trying to manage the outcome. "Can you be that?" she asked him plainly. "I don't know yet," he said, and it was the most honest thing he'd said to her since the night they met. "But I'd like the chance to find out. On your terms, starting whenever you say." She thought about it for a moment, then allowed herself, for the first time in 14 months, a real smile. "Thursday," she said, "your old shift night. Since it's free now." He agreed before he could think better of it, already reaching for his phone to clear whatever sat on that calendar, when the phone buzzed in his hand before he could type a single word. A message from his sister Soo-jin, 3 words long, urgent enough that his face changed the moment he read it. Tiffany watched something shift behind his eyes, something that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with a name neither of them had said out loud in weeks. "What is it?" she asked. He looked up at her slowly, and for the first time since she'd known him, Min-jun didn't have an easy answer ready. "It's about Orlando," he said. "He's out. If this story had you holding your breath from the very first scene, my beautiful story lovers, you already know what to do. Drop a comment telling me exactly where your heart was racing the hardest. Hit that like button and subscribe to Afro Soul Love TV.